I want to welcome everyone, and I'm very glad that you could join us today. My name is Megan Poole, and I'm the Central Regional Coordinator of the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I will be the host and question moderator for today's webinar, which is Outward In, Community-Led Programming and Asset Mapping. I am very happy that all of you are here today. Our presenter is Barry Trott, and he is the Adult Services Consultant at the Library of Virginia, where he helps public libraries across the Commonwealth to plan and develop services for adult library users. He earned his MSLS from the Catholic University of American School of Library and Information Science in 1997, and then worked at the Williamsburg Regional Library for 24 years before joining LVA in 2021. I'm just going to interject and say Barry has the coolest hobby. He's a contract musician at the Williamsburg in Virginia, and he plays music, and I think that is just really cool. But anyway, Barry is also an editor of RUSQ, a journal of reference and user experience, and past president of the American Library Association's Reference and User Services Association. He has presented programs for the American Library Association, the Public Library Association, and the Virginia Library Association. He's very popular, and we are so happy that he's here today. He is the recipient of both the Public Library Association's Allie Beth Martin Award and the ALA Reference and User Services Association's Margaret E. Monroe Library Adult Services Award. After this webinar has been transcribed, it will be available on the Indiana State Library's archived webinars page. And if you are watching an archived recording of this presentation, information on how to obtain your LEU is in the video's description in YouTube. For weekly updates on upcoming trainings and to learn more about what's happening in libraries across the state, please subscribe to the Indiana State Library's e-newsletter, The Wednesday Word, and check out our continuing education website for other professional development opportunities. Whew. So let's get started. Thank you so much for being here, Barry. It's such a pleasure. Anytime I see you, I'll hand the presentation over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Megan. It's a real pleasure for me to be here as well and to have a chance to talk with you all. As Megan said, if you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Megan, if the question seems like it's one that would be well answered in context, feel free to connect me with the question right away.
No problem.
I'll stick around at the end and can answer questions then as well. So let's get started with this. I think one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about in terms of library work is that our real job in our profession is about building connections, about building relationships. And there are lots of different ways we do that and lots of different kinds of relationships that we build. We build, obviously, we build relationships between individual library staff and library users, so somebody comes in, and every interaction we have with them is a chance to build a relationship. And we also build relationships between the users of our library and the library itself, the library as an organization. And then we also help build connections and relationships between users. And this was brought home to me when I was talking with a librarian here in Virginia at a meeting we were having about programming, and she said that their makerspace programs are always full, but that the people seem to come less for what the program was about and more for that interaction with other people. So I think that was for me a real sort of a light bulb moment, an epiphany, I guess, that libraries help build connections between members of our community, and I think that's really important. So some of those individual connections, when we think about connections, Um, we have to remember, as I said, that each encounter with a user is a chance for us to create a relationship. It's also, if we do it wrong, it's a lost chance, right? And when somebody has a bad interaction with a library staff member, I was doing some training earlier this week for one of our public libraries for a staff day on customer service. And when you have a bad interaction with someone in that kind of situation, whether it's you at a business or a user at your library, it's likely they're not going to come back, or they're not going to certainly not going to come back to that individual librarian with whom they had a bad interaction. So I think it's important for us to remember that any encounter we have, whether it's at a public service desk, whether it's out in the stacks, whether it's in outreach, it's an opportunity to create a relationship. And then I think I would encourage us to shift from thinking transactionally to thinking about relationship building. We spend a lot of time tracking what we do. We count the number of people who attended a program. We count the number of reference questions we answered, and the number of books that were checked out, and the number of miles that our outreach vehicles have driven, and things like that. All of those things are really important, but the transactions are not at the heart of what we are doing, I would argue. I would argue that relationship building is at the heart of what we're doing. And so the things we're going to talk about today in terms of sort of community-led programming, thinking about maybe some new ways to think about how you connect with your communities, and in terms of a tool called asset mapping from the Institute for Museum and Library Services, give us a way to think more relationally than transactionally. So one thing I like to think about when we think about community connections and community interactions is I used to call these community gatekeepers. And I was talking with a librarian after I did this program back in the fall, and he said, gatekeepers can be a pejorative sort of term for somebody who blocks you from getting somewhere. And he said, why don't you use the phrase community conduits? And so I thought, that's great. I'm going to steal that and use that in the presentation. So when I talk about community conduits, what I'm talking about is who are those people or organizational members in your community who have some connections to groups you're trying to reach. And if you work through a community conduit, you can often reach a group with whom you've had no experience in a much quicker way, because the community conduit has a trust relationship with that community. So when we think about community conduits, some of the kinds of things I'm thinking about here are things like religious leaders. Who are the religious leaders in your community? That's a group that we often as librarians don't reach out to real well. We do have I remember one library director here in Virginia, when he started up, one of the first things he did was go out and make appointments to talk to many of the pastors and religious leaders in his community, just to tell them what the library did and how the library could support the interests of their users. And I think that was a great opportunity he took. And I'd love to see more library folks connect with religious organizations in their community. Schools are an obvious conduit for us to a group of people that we want to connect with, not just the students, but also the parents and the teachers. And that can be another great group to work with. Civic organizations like the Rotary and the Kiwanis and any other civic organizations. Again, great ways to reach people who maybe and probably value the library, but may not realize what the library has for them. A lot of times people value a library for its what they remember as maybe as a child or as a parent with young children. They value what the library does, but they don't use the library because they think, well, I don't have kids, I don't need the library anymore. But libraries have so much for everybody, for people of all ages. And local media is another community conduit that I think it's important to build relationships with. And we want to build those relationships before something bad happens, right? You don't want your first contact with local media to be when a reporter calls you and says, hey, I understand there's some controversy down at the library, right? We want to be inviting the media to come to our libraries to connect with the cool things that we're doing so that when something bad does happen, they're going to call us and say, hey, could we talk about this rather than just sort of blasting it out? So think about some of those community conduits and what does that mean for your library right now? So go ahead, if you would, drop in the chat. Who are some other community conduits that you might work with as you're thinking about things you're doing with your library? So who are some other of those community conduits that you maybe already are working with or that you want to work with? Business owners, community centers, Chamber of Commerce, City Council, that's a great one. Senior living facilities, definitely. Social services, colleges and universities, homeschool groups, immigrant welcome centers. These are great ideas. So you all are already well down the line here, I think, in terms of thinking about this kind of community-led programming. So let's talk about that right now. Oops, I got to go back and click back on my slides. There we go. So traditionally, library work or library programming has been focused on with an inward focus, where library staff plan programs based on hopefully based on some assessment of what the community is interested in or needs and wants. That's not a bad way to do things, but I mean, those of you who are programmers probably know this. How often have you done a program or put together a program and thought, this is really great, I think this is going to be a great program, and then nobody shows up or only a handful of people show up, right? That's the bane of programming. It's why I never really enjoyed programming, because you never know exactly whether somebody's going to show up or anybody's going to show up for a program, and it's hard. So, but that inward focus, I think, does have some concerns or raise some concerns, and those concerns are I'm going to talk about two specifically. Well, they're sort of tied to each other, really. That library staff tend to not necessarily reflect the makeup of their entire community. So when we think about library staff, when you look at library staff as a whole, and this is obviously a generalization, but library staff tends to be white, female, able-bodied, middle-aged, and middle class, more or less. Obviously, we have people of all different sorts working in our libraries, but as a whole, library staff tend to reflect this particular perspective. And what that means is that the diversity of perspectives in your community may not be completely reflected in library programming if you're developing it just from your own ideas. And you know, we all try to be as broad-minded and obviously unbiased as possible, but I think all of us also, you know, have our own particular set of focuses, and that just is reflected from who we are. So if we are developing programs simply out of our own perspective, we may be missing opportunities to connect with groups in our communities who would be interested in programs that we do, who are, you know, interested in things that the library might have. But if the library is not doing things that show that they have that stuff or that they're interested in connecting with those communities, it's going to be sort of less likely that those folks are going to come to the library just on the off chance there might be something there for them. There's a group called the International Association for Public Participation, or IAP squared. And they put out this interesting chart. I think it's really valuable. And I will send Megan the slides after the show so that you can have some of the links that are in the slides here if you want to go out and explore more. But the IAP squared developed this thing called the spectrum of public participation. And as they note, it was designed to assist with the selection of the level of participation that defines the public's role as there is an opportunity for participation. So I think this is an interesting sort of sliding scale to look at. And if we start from the left-hand side, where it says inform, in that case, the goal of public participation is simply to provide people with information, to put stuff out there that we have that maybe helps them understand issues, opportunities, solutions, and the commitment or promise that's been made to the public in that case is simply that we'll tell you about what's going on. Right? That's the only commitment that you're making. We'll keep you informed. If you slide a little bit more to the right, then we start looking at the idea of consulting. And here, maybe you obtain feedback from the things that you're doing. You do surveys, you do follow-up forms, you ask people how something worked. And what you're doing there, what your commitment to the public is in that case, in the consult range, would be we're going to keep you informed and we're going to listen to any concerns you have about the things that we're doing, and maybe talk to you a little bit about how your input has influenced what's going on. So that's a little bit more engaging with your public, right? When we talk about involving, what you're saying is that the goal is to work directly with the public throughout your entire process to ensure that as it says here, that the concerns and aspirations are understood and considered. And what you're committing to there for your public is that you're going to work directly with them to ensure that those concerns and aspirations are reflected in what you're doing, in the plans you develop and the programming you do. And again, you're going to provide feedback on how their input has helped define and decide what you're going to do. The next step over would be to collaborate. And there, you're partnering with the public in all aspects. So this would be in terms of the design, in terms of the implementation, in terms of the evaluation process. And you're there really connecting or committing to connect with your public or the group you're working with to help formulate solutions and programs directly incorporating their advice and their recommendations to the extent that it's possible. Obviously, if somebody says you should spend $1 million doing this program, the library probably doesn't have $1 million to drop into a specific program like that, right? So this is all within the structure that you can do. And then the final step that IAP squared would put forth is empower, which places the final decision making in the hands of the public, and you implement what they decide. I would argue that probably most libraries are not looking to get to that empower stage simply because that's not practical really. But think about this. Think about this, sort of sliding scale from inform through consult, involve, and collaborate to empower. And think about and drop in the chat here, if you don't mind. I'm sorry, I'm moving over here. Drop in the chat, where is your library now on that scale? So I'll go back one slide so we can look at inform, consult, involve, collaborate. Where do you think your library is now? And there's no right or wrong answer here, because each individual library has to make its own decision about what's the right place for it to be. But where do you think your library is right now? And go ahead and drop that in the chat. We'll wait a second here. Some collaboration, some inform. So some of each, that's an interesting. A lot of libraries are, I think, Jenna, are just still at the inform. Yeah, so you can see we're seeing a sort of a range of possibilities. And okay, so there, somebody said, Jenna said, we want to make it to the consult step this year, and that's a great goal. This might be something to take back to your library and say, where do we want to be as an institution, right? And to build that into your goals for the year. So no, I think that's a great thing to do. And you can be at different levels for different programs. But the idea here is to think about where you are on that scale and where you might want to be. And so this new model, if you start thinking about this, you start thinking about creating plans with your community, not for your community. And what does that mean? I think that means you really need to have an understanding of the community itself. And I would argue that that understanding needs to go beyond simply saying, well, we have, the census tells us we have X number of people in our community, and, there's this kind of ethnic breakdown, things of that nature. We need to understand not only the if you want to call it the picture of our community, but we want to understand the aspirations that our community has, right? And we'll talk more about that when we get to the asset mapping tool. But I think that's important to think about the difference between understanding or knowing the demographics of your community, though this is part of the creating plans with your community rather than for. Demographics are an important part of that, but there's also, you need to get out and you need to learn and listen, which means you need to talk with your folks. You need to develop a portrait of your community by building relationships with community partners that are going to give you a sense not just of what people need, because that's important, right? You want to hear what people need. What do they think that the needs of the community are? But you also want to ask them, what are they aspiring to? What do they want the community to be like? So I think starting with that question is really, really a great model for looking outward as we think about developing programming for our libraries, right? If we stop saying, we think we know what the community needs. This community has this problem and we're going to help solve it through this program, or this community has this interest. They may or may not have that interest, or maybe some people in the community have that interest, but maybe not everybody does. So we want to be out in the community, listening to people, both to what they say they need, but remember, they don't always know what the library can do. So just asking them, what do you need us to do, is not necessarily going to help you, because they don't really have any idea of what's possible necessarily. But if we start by asking them, what do you want the community to look like? What do you aspire for our community to be? Then you can start to think about, how does programming that we're doing help us get to where they're aspiring to be? And I can't give you specific examples because this is going to be different for every community. Every community's aspirations, and even different groups in your community are going to have different aspirations for the community. But if you're out there listening to what those are, then you can start to plan programming collaboratively. If you're talking to people about their aspirations, then you go back and say, okay, we can help in this area, or we can help develop programming in this area. Then you go back to them and you talk about the kind of programming. You can say, we heard from you that you're aspiring for this community to be X, whatever it is, for this community to be more engaged in a particular area, whatever it happens to be. And we're thinking about putting some programming on around this topic that seems to fit with that aspiration. What do you think about that? Is that something your folks would come to? Is this hitting the things that you think are important? So we start to work with them as we're developing the programming. We're still engaged in it from the library perspective, and I think that's really important because we know what we can do. We know what we have the resources for. We know the connections we have with people putting on programming, so we can bring in speakers and things of that nature. But don't forget that outside, your community partners, your collaborators, might also be a great source of folks who are able to speak and present programs for you. Again, having someone local present a program often is going to bring in an audience because they're going to bring in their friends, their colleagues, their family members. Think about, this is just a very generic example, but in Virginia here, there's a very engaged organization coming out of the state state extension service, the cooperative extension service that was developed to work with farming communities and more rural communities, but they also work in all communities. All counties have an extension agent. I don't know if there's something similar in Indiana, but there's an organization called Master Naturalists that's part of the extension service. And when Master Naturalist folks put on a program, they bring in a already preset audience, as well as then other folks who might just be interested in the topic. So thinking about planning programming collaboratively with groups in your community about things that are going on in your community, about things that are related to their aspirations, their needs, their hopes, can be really potent. It's also really important to include partners, those partners, in the evaluation process. So when you develop collaborative programming, working with community partners, make sure that they're engaged in the evaluation of the program. So, not only that you're getting from them, did they think it did well, but what are they hearing from their community members? What are they hearing from the folks who they're connected with? Did this meet their needs? And then you can share also, do you feel like it met the needs of the library? But it's that collaborative evaluation that I think is really important. I would argue also, as an aside here in a sense, that program planning is, or evaluation is a huge part of program planning. And it's one that unfortunately we so often, I think, let go, partly because usually we're so busy we're on to the next program without taking a lot of time to evaluate. Evaluation does require time and energy, and it's often, I think, easier for us to say, oh, we'll get back to that. I would argue, though, that a program is really not completed until you've done some evaluation, because otherwise, how are you going to know whether that was a successful program? How are you going to measure that against where you're trying to be as a library? So we want to think about what success looks like. So if what is, let me just ask you all, and again, let's go to the chat for this. What does success look like for programming for you? And how might success look different if you were thinking about programming that was based around sort of a community-led model or a community engaging model? And there are a couple of libraries, especially up in Canada, and again, I'll send Megan some follow-up links that have implemented community-led programming. So I'm just looking at some of the things in the chat here. We've implemented a program proposal form to encourage community members to submit requests to partner. That's a cool idea. Recurring participation. Yeah, I think that's a great model, right? If people come back. Yep. More than 5 people showing up would be a huge success. I feel your pain, Julie. I know exactly what you mean. Right. A primary goal is just a positive experience of the library. That's a great point as well. Yeah, and you want to feel like the attendance of the program is balancing out the effort you put into putting on the program, right? That's a real key one. Yep, things that will enrich people's lives. How we just call everyone until someone says yes. I like that. Stick-to-itiveness can helpful. Yep, so more attendance. Again, remember that's a transactional number. It's an important transactional number, right? But we also want to think about that relationship piece, not just the transaction piece. So we want to get more people there, but also I think it's important to think about the quality and what does the program make a difference for the people who are there? A couple of folks mentioned that in chat, right? What does the program do for the people who are there? Did it make a difference in their lives? And we may never know that. That's one of the hardest things to measure for library programming, is sort of the outcome of someone attending a program, right? I think Tony has a good point. You want the community to realize that decreased tax revenue has an impact on library programming, right? Absolutely. That's something that programming does. So let's look at this slide now, and let me slide over and close the chat down for a second. So when we look at the traditional model versus a community-led model, and this particular slide was taken from a Web Junction training on community-led programming. In the traditional model, the staff assesses the community by looking at demographic data, maybe some user statistics from the library itself. Maybe they do a couple of surveys. They identify what they think are some gaps in the services the library provides. They get together amongst themselves and they develop that response, deliver a service, and then they evaluate it. Maybe we get some feedback, look at the data points that might be affected by that, and say, did it work or not? So that's sort of traditionally how library programming is done. We think we should be starting with community assessment always, and the library's strategic plan. But we do that. We try to identify what the community needs might be. We plan and deliver the service, and then we evaluate it, and then we start all over again. With a community-led model, which is more time consuming. I don't want to be minimizing the fact that community-led programming is more time consuming, because you have to start off by developing relationships with the community members, right? You don't start off just by saying, hey, here's a cool program, right? You need to build those relationships. And then as you're having those discussions, you're listening to those community members. You're listening to your partners, you're hearing them talk about their aspirations, their priorities. Then you sit down with them and you talk about ideas for programming. The library staff facilitate those discussions, and we'll talk something a little bit about that in the asset mapping part again. But the library staff are facilitators here, talking with the community and with other library staff about what sort of services or programs are needed. And because the library, you can have a clear idea of what the library can do. They have a clear idea of what their community needs or wants or aspires to. And bringing those two pieces together, then you develop that service and deliver the service both with the staff and the community involved in the delivery piece of it as well. Think about how much easier marketing will be if you have community members helping you with get the word out about the things that you're doing, because they're excited about it, because they're engaged with and involved in it. And then following the evaluation piece is, again, you're going back and meeting with those community members to talk about how all this happened. How did the process work? How did the delivery work? Is it something that we can replicate? Is it sustainable? And what difference did it make? So if we do all those things, then we're starting to get at this idea of community-led programming and engaging with our communities to hopefully provide them with the kinds of programming not only that they need, but also that they'll come to and that they feel will make a difference in their lives. So some things to consider before we move on to asset mapping. We really need to do that assessment piece, and I think I'm going to change this just to take the word needs out, because the assessment is an assessment not just of needs of the community, but again of their hopes and aspirations, of where they want to be. We need to think about the diversity of our community and make sure we're connecting with all of the different potential groups in our community, that we're not just focusing on one group or the other, that we're reaching out, at least trying to connect with and hear from the diverse range of folks who live in our communities, so that we can make sure that we are offering programming that reflects the diverse needs, interests, and aspirations of our community members. We want to think about those partnerships, those formal, maybe, or a little bit more formal relationships where we're really sitting down and engaging, that I would say often are a two-way street, where you're getting something back valuable from the partnership as well as giving something. If it's just a one-way street, if the library is just going out and doing something for somebody, that's not really a complete partnership. With a real partnership, you need to be engaging with them and getting something back from that engagement, a better understanding of the needs, hopes, and aspirations of that particular group in the community. Think about how you're going to involve volunteers in your programming. Again, having people from the community doing the programs or engaged with the programs can really make a difference in bringing an audience in, because they'll be excited about it. They'll know people. Think about the school play, right? Who comes to the school play? Parents, grandparents, friends, and things like that. It's the same thing with library programming. If we can engage our communities and get them involved in the program planning, then we can also hopefully expand our audiences to include the folks that they're going to bring in who might not otherwise know that the library has something of interest for them. We want to build that inclusive environment. We want people to feel like the library has something for everyone, right? In terms of collection development, you often hear this mentioned as sort of mirrors and windows, right? If you may have heard that phrase when you're talking about collection diversity, that when someone comes into the library, they should see themselves reflected in the collection. Their interests, their stories should be reflected in the library's collection. And then, so that's the mirror part. And then the library's collection should also be a window into new worlds, because that's how we develop empathetic communities, is we help them better understand what other people's lives are like. And I would argue that programming is the same way. Our programming should be both mirror and window. It should reflect our people's stories and their lives, and it should be a window into new lives and new experiences, so they can expand their understanding of the other people in our community, and hopefully we develop more empathetic, more engaged, and more connected communities there. It's all about those relationships. We want to think about the feedback mechanisms. How are we going to find out about how we did? Is it going to be a survey or a feedback form at the end of the program? How are we going to engage our community partners in giving us feedback, not just about the individual program, but about the overall thing, right? The overall relationship. Is it working? Are we getting something out of it? Are both sides getting something out of it? We want to think about that promotion and outreach piece. And again, if you're working with community partners, you can take advantage of the connections that they have. Maybe they have an email list. Maybe they have places they can make announcements. A weekly Kiwanis meeting. Somebody can make an announcement there about, hey, we're collaborating with the library on this great event next month. Be sure to come out and tell your fellow Kiwanians or your fellow Rotarians, things like that. And think about that evaluation piece. That we really need to sit down and do serious evaluation. It's not just a matter of, did the person like the program? Would they want to see other programs like this, or what other things would they want? We want to try to do some evaluation that does get at, does this make a difference to people? How is this changing your life, kind of thing. Harder to do, but I think it's important to think about. And the last thing we want to think about is sustainability. I think, again, programming is great. Library programs are wonderful. They connect us with people in really interesting and thoughtful ways. I would think we always want to connect our programming to the other things we're doing in the library, so to our collections if we can, and to our other services. But we always want to think about, our programs sustainable? Can we keep this sort of thing going? Because it's that sustainability piece that I think is really important, right? If we do something and it turns out great, we want to be able to continue doing that great thing, right? until the point at which maybe it starts to drop off. And all things do have a life cycle, and it's okay to stop doing things too. But we don't want to have to stop doing something simply because we didn't plan for how we were going to be able to continue doing it. And whether that means thinking about the staff resources that are involved, any financial resources that are involved, the connections with the community partner, whatever it happens to be. We want to think about all those aspects of sustainability. I see that Emily put in, said, as a teen librarian, there are challenges and opportunities when it comes to attracting and retaining the teen population. I think you're absolutely right. And that's sort of one reason why I think this kind of approach can be helpful with that, because teens can be a sort of a, when they're somewhat of a transient population, right? Stephanie says, what role does marketing play in program planning? I think definitely marketing plays a huge role in program planning, right? You can do great programs, but if you can't get the word out, that then nobody's going to know you're doing it, right? So how are you marketing things? That's again the value to working with community partners as you're developing programming, though, is you can get them to help with that marketing piece. Yes, and Julie, I think this is a really interesting point we've been talking a lot about here in Virginia. I don't know about Indiana demographically, but Virginia is a rapidly aging state. And most of our communities, many of them anyway, are seeing a rapid growth in folks 65 and older and fewer children, right? So if we focus only on children, we're missing a large and growing part of our community, and continuing to focus on children when children are decreasing and seniors or older adults, I think is the preferred term now. When older adults are the increasing population, if you're not focusing things on them and you're giving all your resources to kids programming, well, you're really, I think, setting yourself up in the long run for some serious concerns. And that, I think we're seeing some things from Christina and from Jenna about the sort of are they sometimes called new adults, the people in their 20s and 30s. And those, again, those can be challenging folks to engage with programming if they don't have, especially if they don't have kids. One thing to think about for that might be to think about, where are those people going right now? Are there places where they are going? Are there already existing organizations or groups to which they belong? Maybe not, but if there are, those might be places you could start to think about connecting with in terms of developing programming. Certainly some libraries have been doing things like book groups out in breweries and cideries and things like that. So that's that's sort of one place that people are trying to reach a younger crowd. Carissa says craft programs and puzzle days do bring them in. That's interesting ideas. So I think, connecting with local high schools. Is there a community college in your area that you could connect with? That might be another area. Melissa says, our biggest problem, we aren't a countywide system. The public thinks they can't attend programs either. That's an interesting one. I'm not quite sure what to think about that. But I guess just continuing to make the point that you're open to all. So I think, Megan, that's a great summing up. See what they want before just trying things out, right? Some colleges can be tricky. It's sometimes, and a lot of these, it's finding the right person to connect with. So I mean that's easy for me to say, right? Because I'm not out there trying to do that. But sometimes it is a matter of just finding somebody who is interested in connecting with the library. Are there libraries in Indiana where that have a college where the students use the public library, in a sense, right? So I think just talking about how we are open to all, right? That makes it that's really the message we have to keep pushing. So these are all great ideas. So I'm going to move now because I'm just really realizing how much time we have left and how many slides I have left. But we're going to move now to talk about. Let me go forward to talk about asset mapping. And again, I'll stick around at the end to take more questions and have more discussion. I'm happy to do that. Asset mapping is a tool that was developed by the Institute for Museum and Library Services, and there is a link at the end, and I'll make sure that, as I said, that Megan has that for you to go and find these tools. But asset mapping looks at defining a community by its strengths and resources rather than by its needs. And so it's a way, and I think this is really crucial, it's a way, and this is from the Asset Mapping Guide, it's a way to shift from seeing a community as full of needs to be filled by our or other agency services, as to seeing them filled with talents, resources, and resident-led change efforts and ideas that are waiting to be noticed, valued, and connected. I don't normally read the whole slide, but I think that's a really important thing. We're not looking at our communities as places that have things we need to fix, but we're looking at them as places that have lots of resources that we can work with through the idea of community-led programming, say, and help develop into making our community places people want to be. So this is, I think, a good example of when you look at through a needs lens versus an assets lens. The needs lens, that gray box in the upper left, if you're looking at a community needs map, you might see something like this. Well, the community has situations with lead poisoning, with illiteracy, with graffiti, with housing, with drug abuse, with unemployment. When you start looking at a community that way, what's your first reaction? Your first reaction, and the first reaction of the people you're talking with in the community, might be to say, oh, what a horrible place we live in. Why would anybody I want to get out of here as quickly as I can. But if you start looking at your community through what this tool calls an asset lens, then you start to look at what are the assets, the resources in the community that can help make the community whatever it aspires to be. What do we have? What are those great things we have? We have schools, we have businesses, we have parks and hospitals and libraries. We have churches and homeowner groups and block clubs and different groups around culture. We have stories from all the people in our community, the different places they've come from, the places they've lived. We have different artists. We have all sorts of things that we can take advantage of to help make our community a better place. That doesn't mean we don't have all those needs that are up in the upper left. But instead of focusing on the needs, let's focus on the assets we have and then think about how do we want our community to look, which is really about dealing with the needs, but doing it through those assets we already have, taking advantage of those strengths, those skills. You're getting people excited about what they can do. So asset mapping really expands traditional thinking about library relationship building. It realizes or recognizes the value that the community brings in the library work and to library work, right? So the community is there to help support us, but they can also directly help with the work that we're trying to do. We can engage with the community in our work in a way that brings the strengths and assets that they have into our work. It centers the work on the community itself. That's not to say library buildings are not important, because they still really are important. There's no question that libraries as community centers, I try not to use that word because it's not, I don't want you to think about libraries as community centers in terms of like a rec center, but as centers for the community, as a hub for the community is important. But the work that we do if we come at it from an asset mapping perspective, helps us think more about centering that work on our community instead of centering on the needs of the library itself. We need to do both, but we need to focus on the community and not just the library. And it keeps the focus on the strengths of the community rather than the negative aspects of the community, really important. And it also helps build opportunities for coaching and mentoring, for developing the community, for working with people in the community to build strengths. So when we look at community assets, we're looking usually at 6 different areas. We're looking at individual assets, the assets that associations have, the physical assets of the community. We'll talk about each of these shortly. The institutional assets, the local economy, and the culture and stories that a community has. So those are the things that we're talking about. So in one or more of those 6 areas is where you're going to find a community's assets. When we talk about individual gifts and talents, we're talking about what skills, what talents do our neighbors have? What skills and talents do the people in the community have, right? And there could be all sorts of skills, the artistic skills, physical skills, storytelling skills, knowledge skills, all sorts of skills that we have as individuals. When we talk about associations, there we're talking about small groups that are resident-led. So again, these are usually things like your community organizations, your Kiwanis, your homeowners or block associations, local book clubs, things of that nature. When we talk about institutions, there we're talking about organizations that have paid staff. And again, these sort of institutions have assets. And these are, your businesses, your nonprofits, your local government, many of the things we've already talked about, right? When we're talking about community connections and developing community partnerships. When we talk about physical space, we're talking about things like parks, lakes, green space, walkable space, things of that nature. What does the community have? When we're talking about the economy and exchange, we're talking about where does that happen? Where does money get spent? But also, where does barter happen? Where do things get exchanged without money necessarily? Do they? And do you know? But where do businesses happen? Where are things developing? Where are new things coming up? And when we talk about culture and stories, we're talking about all those traditions, all those stories that all the different groups in our community have brought to the community simply by being there, right? And these are always changing. We're seeing new groups coming into our community. We're seeing our community demographics change constantly. It's a constant flow. And we need, as library folk, we need to be aware what that flow is and what those local stories, cultures, and traditions are. In part, so maybe we can capture them if they're in danger of disappearing, but also so we know where to look for and connect with new people who are coming into our community. So what are a local community's assets? You all live in communities around the state and all have different community assets, but some of them are things like this: schools, colleges, city offices, cultural groups and organizations, arts organizations, book groups, things like that, banks, museums, medical providers in our community. Certainly they are an asset as well. I'm going to hide the meeting controls just so they don't get in the way here. I'm going to come back here and click so I can keep moving. Faith organizations, we already talked about that when we were talking about community conduits. Gas stations. I don't think we think about gas stations as an asset, but in a lot of communities, a gas station is a place where people can buy food sometimes, right? Maybe, we talk about food deserts, places that don't have a grocery store. Gas stations are places where people connect and gather. Same thing with bus stops and train stations. People connect and gather there. They can be important assets. Social service organizations, this could be both local government as well as nonprofit. Game and bookstores. Libraries, clearly an asset there. rec centers and community centers, any parks we have, restaurants, and any other small businesses, right? These are all different assets that we find in our communities. So we're going to look at some ways to map some assets. You can map individual assets. That would be looking at the skills, gifts, and talents, as well as the dreams, hopes, and aspirations, and the fears that individuals have. What motivates somebody to act, whether it's an aspiration or a fear, right? You can look at those. We can map associations. What are the associations we do know? Are there associations you don't know about in your community that you should find out about? What do those associations currently do? And we'll look at some tools to do this in just a minute. You can map your institution or help other institutions map their gifts and assets. What gifts do employees and volunteers bring? What are the strengths that they bring as individuals? What physical space do you have? What equipment do you have? So thinking about your library, meeting rooms perhaps, computer equipment, Wi-Fi, things of that nature. And what current relationships do you have with your community? When you're looking at physical space mapping, that's a lot about what happens in your neighborhood. One way to do this is simply get a pad of paper and a writing implement and walk the 2-block area around your library and draw a map. What's there? Do you know what's in your neighborhood, around your library? I was doing this program on for one of our public libraries down in the southwest part of Virginia, and I was talking with the director at lunchtime, and he said, that's a really interesting point, that idea of physical mapping. He said, I was driving around after work, just right around the corner from the library, and I discovered there was a Middle Eastern market there. He said that had a restaurant attached. He said I had no idea that we had a Middle Eastern market, which led me to think, he said, that that's a community I was not aware of. Folks who are interested in that, and then maybe ways to reach out to them. Think about what happens where in your community. Where do people gather for fun? Where do they go for business, for shopping? And then what difference might that make to your thinking about the things that you are doing with the library? When you look at the neighborhood economy, you're thinking about where does the money go in and out, right? And then where is business being developed? And we're thinking about culture and stories. We're thinking about any existing skills, backgrounds, personal histories. But I think really, I love this one. Think about, when is the community at its best? When is the community at its best? And then are there local heritage, traditions, identity, and values that we can think about? So I'm just going to look. There are 4 different tools that IMLS has on their asset mapping section of their IMLS website. And again, the link is in the program. I'm just going to talk about one of them today, institutional asset mapping. I think this is a great tool to think about if your library is developing strategic planning or preparing to look at program development in a structured way, or developing partnerships. It's great to do these exercises with staff or stakeholders, because they can really help people develop a better understanding of the institution and bring individual perspectives into the discussion. So how do you do that? So institutional asset mapping is based on some principles that all institutions bring resources and skills to their community. Every institution has things that are assets that it can offer. And that if you know your institution's assets, you can do much more effective collaborative work, both in terms of efficiency and overall effectiveness. If you don't know what you have to offer, how is somebody going to even think about potentially working with you? And institutional asset mapping is also a process that helps bring staff and stakeholders together to look at the institution in a serious and structured way. So when we think about the institutional assets, some of them, from a library perspective, are things like facilities, equipment and materials, right? We have, as I said, computers, we have Wi-Fi, but we also have free stuff to check out. Where else can you get stuff for free anymore? We have the ability to help people develop capacity and train people. We do that all the time. We have staff. We have financial resources, and you have to be careful. You can't commit all your financial resources to collaborations, right? But we do have some financial resources that allow us to do cool things. We have some political clout. Libraries, for the most part, are still appreciated as valuable pieces of the community. And libraries are starting from a place of good connections. We have connections that with people who are important and who value what we do, right? Who can be advocates for the library. So this is just an example of an asset mapping tool that is in the kit on the IMLS website. And it gives you, in this case, each of the boxes that are headed with sort of that brown, orangey color title, personnel, space and facilities, materials and equipment. Those are all empty. And what you would do would be to sit down with a group of people, have them all fill in this chart on their own, then come together and draw a larger version of this, say on a flip chart or a wall chart or something like that, and start filling these in together as a group. And then brainstorm around that. How do you see or feel or think about the organization differently after doing this? How has this shifted the way you think about engaging with the community, right? You'll learn things as you go through this asset mapping, institutional asset inventory process. You can also do that with partnerships. You can map, from your institution here, who are your existing relationships with and who are your potential relationships with. Again, if you do this with a group of people, you might find that that top section of the chart is filled with things you never thought about, because people will bring ideas to this process that I think are really valuable, and getting those individual ideas about community assets can be really helpful. Some other institutional asset mapping tools that are part of the kit would be looking at an employee asset map, mapping who we know in our community. Those are the two other pieces for institutional asset mapping. So we have 5 minutes left. So this is pretty good. So these are the resources to look at. The IMLS website, and is last time I looked, which was about a week and a half ago, this was still there. So that's good. But this is the overall asset mapping user guide, a link to the user guide for asset mapping as an overall tool. And then there are four different asset mapping guides. There's one to mapping individual gifts and skills, one to working with resident-led associations in terms of mapping their assets, one for institutional assets, that's the one we just quickly ran through, and one for looking at mapping agency-led assets. All of these have different applications, and they are completely customizable. I was talking, we had our state public library directors meeting last week, and I was talking to one of the directors who had attended a program I did with my colleague, this program, for our state library conference last fall, and she said, I took that institutional assets tool and we modified it to make it a little simpler, but we sat down and had 65 people sitting down at a meeting, and we worked through that and came up with some amazing stuff. So I think that if you look through these asset mapping resources and think about how you can modify them for your own needs and own interests, they can really go a long way to helping you develop ideas about your community and your institution that will help you go forward in terms of developing not just programming, though that's an important piece and obviously was some of the focus today, but really about building those relationships with your community that are going to be there to stand the library in good stead, both in good times and in hard times. And the stronger our relationships are with our communities, and the more we are seen as a valued institution in the community, the better off the library is going to be in the long run. So thank you all very much. for all that you do, because public libraries are essential to their communities, and strong libraries build strong communities. So thank you all very much for what you do out there every day. It's hard work. I know I did it for 24 years before I came to the state, working in a public library. And it's challenging work, but it's also really rewarding work. And so thank you all for that. And I'm happy to take any questions now. And I guess I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
I just wanted to say thank you, Barry, for that wonderful presentation. Just great information, and especially the IAP2 spectrum. That even got me thinking just about um, libraries in general and how they can grow and where they are and where they want to be. And I greatly appreciate you sharing your time today.
That's my pleasure. My pleasure. So, does anybody have any questions I can answer? I know Megan put my email in the chat, so you can always reach out to me here at the Library of Virginia. Happy to do that. And as I said, Megan, I'll send you the slides as soon as we're done here today. I'll send you a PDF of the slides and also a sort of a follow-up resources thing with links to some white papers that I believe Vancouver and Edmonton public libraries in Canada did community-led programming white papers that I think are really interesting to look at.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So everyone, as as a reminder, if you are watching an archived recording of this presentation, information on how to obtain your LEU is in the video's description in YouTube. So I will send LEUs out hopefully in a few days, maybe up to 30 days. But they will come out. And you will get those within a week, hopefully. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And if there are any questions, because we are a little over time, please send your questions to Barry's email, which is in the chat, or to myself, and I can forward them to Barry. Um, but I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And Barry, I hope you take care.
And
And
you
thank you
too.
so much.
All right. I look forward to seeing you sometime along the line at a meeting, Megan.
Oh, that's wonderful.